Hey everyone, it's Spin, and today we're going to be talking about the lore of Valorant. Now, I know that's different than the usual format, but there's stuff in here that nobody is talking about. Now, I know what you're thinking. We don't really know anything about the lore in Valorant, so what is there to talk about? Well, that's kind of true and kind of not true. We don't necessarily have any story trailers or comics like League of Legends does, but there's a lot happening in the background of Valorant that no one is paying attention to. So the creative director of Valorant, David Nottingham, said himself that he wants to build a minimal foundation for the game. He doesn't really want to hand the story to us like on a plate and tell us exactly what's going on with the characters and with the story in Valorant. They're really kind of going for this drip feed approach where you kind of have to dig a little bit and pay attention to what's happening in the game to get the story out of it. I think it's really clear that they want us to kind of dive a little bit more into what's happening and figure it all out for ourselves. In an interview with Game Informer, David Nottingham himself said, "I honestly get excited about the stories that players are telling each other. I don't want this to be something where it's like, we are feeding you story. Receive our story. You're blown away by our story." So let's look at the core of what's happening in Valorant. There are attackers who are trying to plant a spike on some sites, and the defenders are trying to stop that from happening. So what's this precious material that's seen on all the sites in Valorant? It's called Radiant. And what does Radiant do? We don't exactly know, but what we do know is that it's obviously a source of power. Is it too much power? Probably, yes, which may explain why there's a rogue group of attackers that are trying to destroy it while another group of defenders are trying to preserve it. But is Radiant really dangerous to anyone? The answer is probably yeah. I find it crazy that when we play Haven, no one really pays attention to the massive rock-like pillars that are sprouting out from the ground and about to envelop the entire map. But what's at the base of the pillars? A box of Radiant. I think it's clear that whatever Radiant is, it can be dangerous, especially if it's handled improperly. Or maybe it's possible that these pillars that are erupting from the ground were caused by something or somebody in an attempt to aid the attackers who are trying to destroy the Radiant itself. Either way, it's quite sad because Haven is clearly the most tranquil and peaceful of all the locations in Valorant. At least before the rock pillars showed up. It is called Haven after all. But let's talk about what is perhaps the most interesting thing happening here, and that's Kingdom. Clearly, Kingdom is some kind of massive entity slash mega conglomerate in Valorant. They create like almost everything in the game world, and you can see their logo strewn throughout everything. They're the ones who are making the Radiant, they're the ones who are storing the Radiant, they make the spike, and they even make the diffuser. So it's like, who is this mega conglomerate that is making both high-tech explosives and the equipment that's used to defuse it? It's all really ambiguous and really mysterious. It's not far-fetched to me to think that they're probably making all the weapons in the game, although there's no proof of this. Like, there's no logo on any of the weapons or anything like that. But we also know for sure that there is a faction that is against Kingdom because of all the propaganda that's strewn throughout Bind. One of the propaganda pieces clearly compares the conglomerate to a rat, while another shows Radiant with a crossed out symbol. But perhaps the most interesting and ominous is this image of a figure overlaid over Radiant. We don't really know who he is, but he's clearly in charge, and he's probably not the nicest guy in the world based on the way he's being portrayed here. Also notable is a sprayed on stencil of the tower seen in Bind with the wording Kingdom of Lies. Whatever Kingdom's reason for existing is, it's probably not to make the world a better place. But what else do we know? We know that the game takes place on Earth. How do we know that? There are some clear references to Earth language besides English, like Arabic script on Bind, Japanese script on Split, the Chinese architecture of Haven, and some of the agents also discuss their origins in the voice lines, like when Raze talks about her Salvadorian origins.
You can take the girl out of Salvador, but you'll never take the girl out of Salvador.
It's actually quite notable to see Raze talking about a smaller and relatively unstable country like El Salvador like it exists. So my guess would be that in this alternate or near future, most, if not all nations' borders have stayed largely the same. Speaking of voice lines, there's actually some really interesting story to be inferred by some of them. If we wanted to go through all of them and really dissect them, this video would take a long time, so I'm just gonna kind of focus on the ones that interest me the most. Like when Omen is playing against another Omen, he says,
"There is another of me. How many times did I get ripped apart? How many times did I die?"
So clearly Omen underwent some tragic event that made him like he is, but it's also made him clearly cynical because he even taunts his teammates with haunting suggestions like when he talks to Sage.
"Sage, the life you give. Do you ever wonder where it's taken from?"
Viper also has some really interesting voice lines that reveal a lot about the story of the world too. Like when she's starting on Bind, she says,
"The lies we've told this city. Just to pry it open and suck it dry.
It's also really eerie to hear Viper talking about Bind, a clearly Middle Eastern inspired country, and how they've been pried open and sucked dry, which is not too different from our modern world. Viper also appears to blame her opponents for making her like she is sometimes.
I am your monster. You made me this way. Never forget that.
Which is quite monstrous, as she literally uses chemical warfare to kill her enemies, which is against international humanitarian law. Cypher's also really interesting, and he's clearly a tinkerer too. He also appears to be constantly thieving components from his allies to make sure his gear is in tip-top shape.
Breach, I took a servo from your arms for my tripwire. Don't be angry. Little engineer, I borrowed one of your transmitters for my camera. I'll pay you back.
It's also clear that Cypher is from whatever city that Bind takes place in, from his voice line.
However pretty their lies are, they're just sucking my city dry.
There are some naysayers, but I really like the foundation that's here for Valorant. I think the game is quite beautiful, and the story that's unfolding is really interesting to me. But in CS, terrorists are trying to destroy critical supplies, which are being protected by the good guys, the counter-terrorists. While I'm sure that Riot will never declare one side as good and another side as evil, it's really interesting to think that the side that's trying to plant the spike, which is just a bomb, might be the good guys. They might be the freedom fighters. And the people that are trying to stop the bomb might just be some pawns of a mega conglomerate that are hell-bent on maintaining their control over Earth. Or I could be totally wrong on this. Either way, I'm excited to learn more. Hey everyone, my name is Spin. Thank you so much for watching. If you like content like this, please go ahead and like and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. I know I've got like a new lighting setup here and a new camera, but I've actually been making YouTube videos for just over a month now. So if you'd like to subscribe, yeah, that would mean a lot to me. Peace and love, everybody.